My parents always said the same thing. You'll never be as good as your brother. For 30 years, I believed them. I worked twice as hard, achieved twice as much, and gave twice as generously, all while Donald got the credit and I got the criticism. But when I finally asked them a simple question, then tell him to pay all the bills, everything I thought I knew about my family crumbled in an instant. My mom's face went white. What money? We never received a single dollar from you. That's when I realized I'd been living in a carefully constructed lie for 3 years. And Donald? He'd been stealing every penny I sent home, while I was labeled the selfish daughter who never helped the family. This is the story of how I discovered the truth, gathered the evidence, and served justice ice-cold at Thanksgiving dinner, with the entire extended family watching. You see, 43% of American adults feel more anxious than they did last year, and most of that anxiety comes from the people who are supposed to love us most. If you've ever felt like the family scapegoat, if you've ever wondered why nothing you do is ever good enough, or if you've ever suspected that someone in your family is playing games with your heart and your wallet, this story is for you. Because sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who share your last name. Let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up as Elizabeth Smith wasn't easy, but I thought that was just normal family dynamics. I was the responsible one, the achiever, the one who had to prove herself. Donald was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong even when he did everything wrong. Picture this. I graduated valedictorian from high school. My parents' response? Well, you've always been a hard worker. Donald barely graduated, partied through senior year, and crashed Dad's car twice. Their response? He's just going through a phase. Boys mature differently. I earned a full scholarship to MIT for software engineering. You're so lucky to be good at math. Donald dropped out of community college after 1 semester. The system just doesn't work for creative minds like his. I landed a 6-figure job at Google at 25. Must be nice to work for those big tech companies. Donald moved back home at 27 with gambling debts. He's figuring himself out. Not everyone can be a corporate robot. Do you see the pattern? Every success I achieved was minimized, dismissed, or attributed to luck. Every failure Donald experienced was excused, rationalized, or blamed on external circumstances. This is what psychologists call golden child versus scapegoat dynamics, a toxic family pattern where one child can do no wrong while the other can do nothing right. But here's what I didn't understand then. This wasn't just unfair treatment. This was systematic psychological manipulation designed to keep me in my place as the family provider while maintaining Donald's position as the beloved son who needed protection. The golden child gets unconditional love and support, regardless of their behavior. The scapegoat gets conditional approval that must be constantly earned but is never quite enough. Donald could lie, cheat, steal, and fail, and still be going through a tough time. I could work 80-hour weeks, send money home, and achieve every goal I set, and still be too focused on material success to understand what really matters. What really matters, according to my parents, was family loyalty. And family loyalty, in their definition, meant accepting whatever treatment they dished out, while continuously proving my worth through sacrifice and financial support. The system worked perfectly for everyone except me. Donald got to be the eternal child, protected from consequences and showered with forgiveness. My parents got to play the role of long-suffering guardians of their troubled son, while benefiting from their successful daughter's generosity. And I got to be the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who could always be counted on to handle the crisis, pay the bill, or solve the problem. But I was so conditioned to this dynamic that I couldn't see it for what it was: financial and emotional exploitation disguised as family love. The warning signs were everywhere, but I'd been trained since childhood to ignore them. When I got promoted to senior engineer, my parents forgot to congratulate me, but remembered to mention that Donald was struggling to find his path. When I bought my first house, they toured it once and spent the entire visit talking about how Donald needed a co-signer for his apartment lease. When Donald's girlfriend left him, I was expected to call and console him. When I went through a difficult breakup, my parents told me I was too picky and needed to focus less on career and more on relationships. The financial manipulation was even more subtle. It started small, a few $100s when Donald's car needed repairs, just until he gets back on his feet. Then it escalated: emergency dental work, rent assistance, credit card payments, always temporary, always urgent, always presented as helping the whole family, not just Donald. But here's the insidious part: Donald was never the one asking for help. My parents were. They positioned themselves as the intermediaries, the responsible adults managing their troubled son's affairs. They made it seem like they were protecting Donald's pride by not forcing him to ask his little sister for money directly. "Don't mention the money to Donald," Mom would say. "He's already embarrassed enough about his situation. He doesn't need to know you're helping." So I sent money to my parents' account with notes like "for household expenses" or "emergency fund." I thought I was being discreet. I thought I was preserving Donald's dignity. I thought I was helping my family through temporary financial difficulties. What I didn't know was that Donald wasn't embarrassed at all. He knew exactly where the money was coming from, and he was intercepting every penny while telling our parents that I was too selfish and career-obsessed to contribute anything to the family. For 3 years, I sent $2,000 a month to help with what I believed were family expenses, $72,000 total. Money that could have gone into my retirement fund, my emergency savings, or my dream of buying a bigger house. Instead, it was funding Donald's gambling addiction, while he painted himself as the devoted son and painted me as the absent daughter who only cared about making money. But the financial theft was just the beginning. The real damage was psychological. Every family gathering became a performance where I had to prove my worth while Donald was celebrated simply for showing up. Every phone call included subtle digs about my lifestyle, my priorities, my failure to understand what really matters in life. Every achievement was met with polite acknowledgement, followed immediately by concern for Donald's latest crisis. I developed what psychologists call chronic self-doubt, constantly questioning my own perceptions and memories. When my parents would say things like, "You never helped the family," I'd mentally review every check I'd sent, every crisis I'd handled, every sacrifice I'd made. But then I'd think, maybe they mean emotional support, not financial support. Maybe I haven't been present enough. Maybe I am too focused on work. This is called gaslighting, the systematic distortion of reality designed to make the victim question their own sanity. My parents weren't doing it maliciously. They genuinely believed Donald's version of events because it fit their pre-existing narrative about their golden child and their scapegoat daughter. But Donald knew exactly what he was doing. He was playing a sophisticated con game that exploited our parents' favoritism and my desire to be a good daughter. He told them I was selfish while stealing my money. He told them I didn't care about family while using my contributions to fund his lifestyle. He told them he was protecting them from having to ask me for help while ensuring they never knew help was being given. It was brilliant in a sociopathic sort of way, and it worked perfectly for 3 years, until the night everything fell apart. It was 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday when my phone rang. Mom's voice was strained, exhausted. "Elizabeth, I hate to ask, but Donald is in a really bad spot. His car broke down and he can't afford to fix it. He'll lose his job if he can't get to work. Could you possibly send $2,000 just this once?" I rubbed my eyes, already mentally calculating my bank balance. "Mom, didn't I just send $2,000 last month for the heating bill emergency?" Silence on the other end. Then confusion in her voice. "Sent what? When did you send money?" My blood went cold. "Last month, the emergency heating repair. I sent $2,000 to Dad's checking account with a note about the furnace. Elizabeth, honey, we never received any money from you. Our furnace broke in October, and we had to put the repair on a credit card. We're still paying it off." The world tilted sideways. My hands started shaking as I grabbed my laptop and pulled up my banking app. 3 years of transactions stared back at me. Transfer after transfer, all to my parents' account, all with notes about family emergencies. "Mom," I said, my voice barely steady, "I need you to check Dad's bank statements. I've been sending money for 3 years. I could hear papers shuffling, then Dad's groggy voice in the background. More shuffling. Then the sound that would haunt me forever, my mother's sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God, Elizabeth, there are deposits here, dozens of them. But we never saw this money. It must have, Donald has access to this account. He handles some of our banking when we're busy." The room started spinning. 3 years, $72,000. Gone. But the money wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the realization that while I was sending thousands of dollars to help my family, my parents genuinely believed I had never contributed a single penny. Every guilt trip about my selfishness, every comment about my lack of family commitment, every comparison to Donald's devotion to family, all of it was based on a lie Donald had carefully maintained. He hadn't just stolen my money, he'd stolen my reputation, my relationship with my parents, and my sense of reality. "Mom," I whispered, "what has Donald told you about me and money?" Another long pause, then quietly, "He said you were too busy with your career to help family. He said you thought you were above us now that you were successful. He said he didn't want us to bother you with our problems because you'd made it clear that money was more important to you than relationships." I closed my eyes, feeling 3 years of gaslighting crystallize into perfect, horrible clarity. While Donald was telling me he was too proud to let his little sister help, he was telling our parents I was too selfish to offer help. While he was cashing my checks, he was building himself up as the devoted son who protected them from their cold, materialistic daughter. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, and I had been the perfect mark, so eager to prove my worth that I never questioned the system that kept me proving it. But that night, something shifted inside me. The hurt and confusion began transforming into something else, something cleaner, something more dangerous, clarity. For the first time in 30 years, I could see the game that was being played. And for the first time in my life, I decided I was going to win it. The next morning, I didn't call in sick to work. I didn't have an emotional breakdown. I didn't confront Donald in a rage. Instead, I did what I do best. I treated it like an engineering problem that needed to be systematically solved. Step 1. Document everything. I spent my lunch break creating a spreadsheet of every financial transaction I could remember. Bank transfers, Venmo payments, cash gifts, even times I'd paid for family dinners or groceries. The number was staggering, not just the $72,000 in direct transfers, but probably another $20,000 in incidental support over the years. Step 2. Secure the evidence. I downloaded 3 years of bank statements, printed email confirmations, and screenshot every text message where Donald had acknowledged receiving money for the family. Turns out he'd been quite careless in his communications, frequently thanking me for helping out Mom and Dad and promising to make sure they get what they need. Step 3. Verify the timeline. I cross-referenced my payments with my parents' financial crises. Every emergency that had prompted a request for help, the furnace, the roof repair, Dad's medical bills, the car trouble, had actually happened. But none of the money I'd sent had gone towards solving these problems. My parents had struggled through each crisis alone, using credit cards and depleting their savings, while believing their successful daughter was too selfish to help. Step 4. Understand the psychology. I spent evenings researching narcissistic family systems, financial abuse patterns, and scapegoat dynamics. Everything I read confirmed what I was beginning to understand. This wasn't a simple case of theft. This was a sophisticated emotional manipulation, designed to maintain the family power structure while exploiting my resources. Donald hadn't just taken my money, he'd positioned himself as the family hero while positioning me as the family villain. Every dollar he stole reinforced the narrative that he was the good son who sacrificed for his parents, while I was the selfish daughter who abandoned them. Step 5. Plan the confrontation. This couldn't be a spontaneous emotional outburst. It needed to be strategic, public, and undeniable. I needed witnesses, evidence, and perfect timing. The perfect opportunity was 3 weeks away. Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house, with the entire extended family in attendance. While I was planning my strategy, Donald was digging his hole deeper. He called me twice that week, both times with new emergencies that required immediate financial intervention. Each time he positioned himself as the reluctant messenger, the devoted son who hated to ask, but couldn't bear to see our parents struggle. Liz, I know you're busy, but Mom's really stressed about Dad's medication costs. I've been covering what I can, but... The performance was flawless. The concern in his voice, the reluctant admission of his own financial contributions, the subtle implication that I was the only one in the family who wasn't sacrificing for our parents' welfare. Each call gave me more evidence and strengthened my resolve. Donald wasn't just a thief, he was a sociopath who felt no guilt about destroying his sister's relationship with their parents to cover his crimes. But I had one advantage he didn't know about. I understood systems, and systems can be hacked. The week before Thanksgiving, I made a series of phone calls that would change everything. First, I called my bank and requested detailed records of every transfer to my parents' account, including routing information and deposit confirmations. Then I called my parents' bank and, using my father's account information and claiming to help them organize their finances, requested a summary of all deposits over the past 3 years. The discrepancies were damning. Every penny I'd sent had been deposited into their account and then immediately withdrawn by Donald, using his joint account access, sometimes within hours of the deposit. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source: Donald's ex-girlfriend, Maria, who worked at the bank. When I casually mentioned my family's financial struggles, she let slip something that made my blood boil. Financial struggles, but Donald's always flashing cash at the casino. Last month he lost $3,000 in one night and joked that it was family money, so it didn't really count. Family money, my money. Armed with bank records, communication evidence, and witness testimony, I was ready for Thanksgiving. But I had one more preparation to make, the most important one. I had to prepare myself emotionally for what was about to happen, because once I detonated this truth bomb, there would be no going back. The family dynamic that had defined my entire life was about to be permanently destroyed. Some people might hesitate at this point. Some people might worry about ruining the holiday or tearing the family apart. But I'd learned something important during those weeks of investigation. The family was already torn apart. I was just making the damage visible. For 3 years, I'd been living in a lie. My parents believed I was selfish. I believed I was inadequate. Donald believed he was untouchable. Everyone believed whatever narrative served them best, and the truth was buried under layers of manipulation and misdirection. It was time to excavate it. The night before Thanksgiving, I carefully organized my evidence into manila envelopes, each labeled with a family member's name. Inside each envelope, copies of bank statements, printouts of text messages, and a timeline of Donald's lies. Not accusations, just facts, dates, and documentation. I also wrote a letter to my parents explaining everything I'd discovered and everything I'd felt, not in anger, but in sadness, because the real tragedy wasn't just that Donald had stolen from me. It was that he'd stolen 3 years of honest relationship between me and our parents. 3 years when they could have known how much I loved them and wanted to help them. 3 years when I could have felt appreciated instead of inadequate. 3 years of genuine family connection lost to one man's greed and manipulation. As I sealed the envelopes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not happiness. This situation was too painful for happiness, but the deep satisfaction of finally seeing clearly, finally understanding the truth, and finally being ready to act on it. Tomorrow the lies would end. Tomorrow the evidence would speak. Tomorrow justice would be served with the turkey and stuffing. And Donald was about to learn that stealing from a software engineer was the biggest mistake of his pathetic life. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the kind of crisp November air that makes everything feel possible. I woke up at 5 a.m., not from anxiety, but from anticipation. Today was the day 3 years of lies would finally meet 3 years of evidence, and I was ready. I dressed carefully, not like someone going to war, but like someone going to a business meeting, professional, composed, unshakable. I packed my evidence envelopes in a leather portfolio, the kind I used for client presentations. because that's exactly what this was, a presentation of facts that would speak louder than any emotional outburst ever could. The drive to my parents' house gave me time to review my strategy one final time. Timing was everything. I needed to wait until everyone had arrived. All the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had witnessed years of family dynamics, the same extended family who had seen me labeled as the selfish career woman, while Donald was praised as the devoted son. They needed to hear this truth as much as my parents did. I also needed Donald to feel completely secure, completely in control, before I pulled the rug out from under him. That meant letting him play his usual role, the charming host, the concerned son, the brother who worried about Elizabeth working too hard to enjoy family time. When I arrived at 2 p.m., the scene was exactly as I'd predicted. Donald was in the kitchen with Mom, playing the helpful son, while Dad watched football in his recliner. The aunts and uncles were settling into their usual spots, and the cousins were corralling their children. Normal, comfortable, familiar. "Liz," Donald called out when he saw me, his smile wide and warm. "I'm so glad you could make it. Mom was worried you might be too busy with work." The performance began immediately, positioning himself as the family intermediary who understood everyone's feelings and motivations. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied evenly, setting my portfolio by the door. "Family is the most important thing, right?" He nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. That's what I always tell people about you. Underneath all that corporate success, you're still the same Elizabeth, who cares about what really matters." It was masterful manipulation, delivered with perfect sincerity. He was simultaneously complimenting me and subtly reinforcing the narrative that my corporate success was somehow separate from my real self, as if caring about family and being successful were mutually exclusive. But I just smiled and nodded. "Speaking of what really matters, I brought some things I'd like to share with everyone after dinner. Kind of a gratitude presentation about family support." His eyes flickered with curiosity, but no concern. After all, why would he be concerned? In his version of reality, he was the family hero, and I was finally ready to acknowledge it publicly. Dinner proceeded exactly as every family gathering had for the past 3 years. Donald held court with stories about his latest job prospects, his volunteer work, his dedication to helping Mom and Dad with everything from grocery shopping to home repairs. He was charming, funny, self-deprecating in all the right ways. Meanwhile, I was asked the usual polite questions about work, received the usual slightly disapproving comments about my long hours, and absorbed the usual gentle lectures about not letting success go to my head. Aunt Linda even mentioned how wonderful it was to see Donald stepping up to take care of his parents while I was building my empire. Each comment stung less than usual because I knew what was coming. Every subtle dig, every implied criticism, every gentle suggestion that I should be more like Donald was about to be revealed as based on a fundamental lie. When dessert was finished and everyone was settling into their post-meal contentment, I stood up and retrieved my portfolio. "Before we all get too comfortable," I said, loud enough to get everyone's attention, "I wanted to share something with the family, something about gratitude and the importance of acknowledging the people who really support us." Mom beamed. "Oh, that's lovely, Elizabeth. What a nice way to end the meal." I began walking around the table, placing sealed envelopes in front of each family member. I've prepared some materials for everyone, information about family financial support over the past 3 years, because I think it's important that we all understand who's really been contributing what. The first flicker of unease crossed Donald's face, but he maintained his composure. "This sounds very thorough," he said with a nervous chuckle. "Very corporate." "Open them," I said simply, taking my seat and opening my own copy. The room filled with the sound of tearing paper, and then silence. The kind of silence that falls when people are trying to process information that doesn't match their understanding of reality. Aunt Karen spoke first, her voice uncertain. "Elizabeth, these bank statements, they show you've been sending money to your parents for years." "That's correct," I replied calmly. $72,000 over the past 3 years, to be exact. Uncle Bob was studying his papers intently. "But Margaret, didn't you tell us last Christmas that Elizabeth never helped with family expenses? That she was too focused on her career to—" "We never received any money," Mom interrupted, her voice shaky. "I mean, we never saw. These deposits were made, but we never—" She trailed off, looking at Dad with growing confusion. Dad was holding a bank statement with trembling hands. These deposits, they matched the dates when Donald said he was helping us with bills. When he said he was covering the mortgage payment, or the car repair, or— All eyes turned to Donald. His practiced charm was cracking around the edges, but he rallied quickly. "There's obviously some kind of mix-up here," he said, his voice taking on a reasonable, let's-all-be-rational tone. "Maybe there was confusion about which account—" "No confusion," I said, pulling out another set of documents. "These are the withdrawal records from your joint access to Mom and Dad's account. Every deposit I made was withdrawn within hours, sometimes minutes, by you." Cousin Mike, who worked in banking, was studying the documents with professional interest. "These routing numbers, Elizabeth, every transfer you made, went directly into your parents' primary checking account. And these withdrawal records show the exact same amounts being moved to a secondary account with Donald's name on it." The room was dead quiet now, except for the sound of papers rustling as everyone absorbed the evidence. Financial records don't lie. Numbers don't have feelings or motivations or family loyalty. They just tell the truth, stark and undeniable. "But that's impossible," Aunt Linda said slowly. "Donald told us you never contributed anything. He said you thought you were too good for the family now that you were successful." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "he told me the opposite. He told me that Mom and Dad were too proud to ask me for help directly. So he was handling the money transfers to preserve their dignity." I started reading from my text messages with Donald, my voice steady and clear. "Thanks for helping out Mom and Dad again. I'll make sure they get what they need. I hate asking, but you know they'd never reach out to you directly. Your support is keeping this family afloat, Liz." Each quote landed like a physical blow. The extended family was looking back and forth between Donald and me like spectators at a tennis match, trying to follow a story that kept changing direction. But it was my parents' faces that broke my heart. The confusion, the hurt, the dawning realization that they had been living in a carefully constructed illusion for 3 years. Mom was crying now, not from anger, but from pure bewilderment. "Donald," Dad said quietly, his voice carrying 3 decades of disappointment, "did you take Elizabeth's money?" This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when Donald would have to choose Between admitting his crimes and digging himself deeper into lies that could no longer be sustained, he chose lies. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said, his voice getting higher and more defensive. "Yes, I handled some financial transfers for the family, but Elizabeth knew that. She gave me permission to manage her contributions, however I thought was best." I pulled out another document. "This is a private investigator's report documenting your gambling activities over the past year. It includes witness statements from casino employees who remember you bragging about playing with family money because it didn't really count when you lost." The room erupted, not in shouting, but in sharp intakes of breath and whispered conversations as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Donald hadn't just stolen money. He had systematically destroyed his sister's reputation while funding his addiction with her generosity. Maria Rodriguez from First National Bank is prepared to testify that you frequently joked about your naive sister, who never questioned where her money went, I continued. She documented your comments because she found them disturbing. Donald's face went from pale to red to a mottled combination of both. "You had me investigated? You hired a private detective to spy on your own brother?" "I documented the truth," I replied calmly. "After I discovered that my parents genuinely believed I had never contributed anything to this family's welfare, while you were stealing every penny I sent." The word stealing hung in the air, like an accusation that couldn't be taken back, because that's what it was. Not family disagreement, not miscommunication, not different perspectives on financial management. Theft, pure and simple. Uncle Bob, who had been quietly studying the financial documents, spoke up in his lawyer's voice. "Donald, these records show a clear pattern of financial fraud. You had access to your parents' account, you intercepted money that was specifically sent to them, and you used those funds for personal expenses while allowing Elizabeth to believe she was helping her parents and allowing your parents to believe she was refusing to help them." "It wasn't like that," Donald said, but his protests were getting weaker. "I was protecting them from having to ask directly. I was managing the family finances. You were stealing," Cousin Sarah said bluntly. She had always been the family truth teller, the one who said what everyone else was thinking. And you were lying to everyone to cover it up. The floodgates opened then. Aunt Karen mentioned how hurt Mom had been last Christmas when she talked about Elizabeth being too successful to care about family problems. Uncle Mike recalled conversations where Donald had painted himself as the sole financial support for his aging parents. Cousin Tom remembered Donald claiming that Elizabeth had changed since getting her big job and forgotten where she came from. Each memory was another nail in the coffin of Donald's carefully constructed narrative. For 3 years, he had played every family member against each other, positioning himself as the hero in everyone's story while painting me as the villain. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, Grandma Rose, my father's 83-year-old mother, who had been quietly listening from her corner chair. "Donald," she said in her creaky but clear voice, "last month you told me Elizabeth refused to help with your father's medication costs. You said she told you the family needed to figure it out themselves because she had more important things to spend money on." She paused, looking at the evidence scattered across the table. But these papers show she sent $2,000 that same week for medical expenses. Where did that money go, grandson? The question came from the family matriarch, the woman whose opinion carried more weight than anyone else's, the grandmother who had defended Donald through every scrape and scandal of his adult life. When Grandma Rose questioned Donald's story, the last pillar of his defense crumbled. Mom was sobbing now, not quietly, but in great, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Elizabeth, baby, we said such horrible things to you. We actually believed you didn't care about us. All those times we criticized you for being selfish, for not helping the family, and you were sending thousands of dollars that we never even knew about. Dad looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. 3 years, he whispered. 3 years of thinking our daughter didn't love us enough to help when she was actually keeping us afloat. Donald tried one last desperate play. Look, maybe I made some mistakes in how I handled things, but my intentions were good. I was trying to protect everyone's feelings. Elizabeth, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, I said, cutting him off. You stole $72,000 from me while destroying my relationship with our parents. You gambled away money that was meant to help our family while telling everyone I was too selfish to contribute anything. You're not a misunderstood victim, Donald. You're a thief and a liar. The room fell silent again. In that silence, everyone had to confront the truth. The family dynamic they had accepted as normal was actually built on systematic deception. The devoted son was a fraud. The selfish daughter was actually the family's primary financial support. The golden child was a sociopath, and the scapegoat was the one who had been keeping everyone afloat. Aunt Linda was the first to speak. Elizabeth, honey, I owe you such an apology. We all do. The things we said about you, the assumptions we made. God, you must have felt so hurt and confused. Confused is a good word for it, I replied. For 3 years, I couldn't understand why nothing I did was ever good enough. I sent money every month and was told I was selfish. I worked hard to build a successful career and was told I had lost touch with family values. I achieved everything our parents said they wanted for us, and somehow that made me the problem child. Uncle Bob was shaking his head in disgust. Donald, this isn't just stealing money. This is psychological abuse. You systematically manipulated your entire family to cover your crimes. Donald's last defense was pure desperation. Everyone's overreacting. It's family money, not some stranger's cash. Elizabeth makes plenty. She could afford to help out her brother. And I did help Mom and Dad, just in different ways. Different ways like what? Cousin Mike asked sharply. Like lying to them? Like isolating them from their daughter? Like gambling away money they desperately needed? I never meant for anyone to get hurt, Donald said, but even he seemed to realize how pathetic that sounded. Intent doesn't matter, I replied. Impact does, and the impact of your choices is that our parents spent 3 years believing their daughter didn't love them while struggling with financial problems that could have been solved with the money I was sending every month. That's when Mom completely broke down. All those times I called you Elizabeth and complained about you not caring. All those times I defended Donald for being the only one who helped us. Oh God, what kind of mother was I? You were a mother who believed her son's lies, I said gently. You were manipulated, just like I was. The only difference is that Donald told you I was selfish, while he told me you were too proud to accept help directly. But the emotional reckoning was just the beginning. The practical consequences were about to unfold like dominoes. Cousin Mike, who understood banking regulations, was already talking about documentation requirements for financial fraud cases. Uncle Bob was making notes about civil remedies and criminal charges. Aunt Karen was asking about restitution and repayment schedules. The family gathering had transformed into an impromptu legal consultation, with Donald at the center as everyone discussed his crimes in the third person, as if he had already been excluded from the family circle. And maybe he had, because when you systematically betray everyone who loves you, when you exploit their trust for your own gain, when you steal not just money, but relationships and peace of mind, at some point you stop being family and start being just another criminal who happens to share your DNA. But for me, this wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even really about the money, though $72,000 is nothing to dismiss. This was about truth. This was about justice. This was about ensuring that Donald could never again manipulate and exploit the people I loved. As the afternoon wore on and the evidence was thoroughly examined, a consensus emerged among the extended family. Donald needed to face real consequences, not just family disappointment. The money needed to be repaid. The lies needed to be publicly corrected. The manipulation needed to stop permanently. "Donald," Grandma Rose said in her quiet but authoritative voice, "you will return every penny you stole from your sister. You will apologize to your parents for lying to them. And you will get help for your gambling problem, or you will not be welcome at family gatherings anymore." It wasn't a request. It was a verdict, delivered by the family matriarch and supported by everyone present except Donald himself. But even facing complete family rejection, Donald couldn't admit full responsibility. "I'll pay Elizabeth back," he said sullenly, "but everyone needs to understand that I was trying to help in my own way." "Your way of helping was stealing and lying," Cousin Sarah said bluntly. "That's not help, that's harm." And that's when I realized the most important victory wasn't financial restitution or family vindication. It was clarity. For the first time in my adult life, I could see my family dynamics clearly, without the distortion of gaslighting and manipulation. I wasn't the selfish daughter who cared more about career than family. I was the responsible daughter who had been systematically exploited by her brother and misunderstood by her parents. I wasn't too focused on material success. I was so focused on family success that I had allowed myself to be financially and emotionally abused for years. The money Donald stole could be repaid. The lies he told could be corrected. But the years of self-doubt and confusion he had caused, those scars would take longer to heal. However, something unexpected happened in the weeks following Thanksgiving. My relationship with my parents didn't just recover. It transformed into something deeper and more honest than it had ever been before. Mom called me 2 days after Thanksgiving, crying again, but this time from relief rather than shock. "Elizabeth, I keep thinking about all the times I made you feel bad about not helping the family. All those guilt trips, all those comparisons to Donald. How do you not hate us?" "Because you were victims too," I told her honestly. "Donald didn't just steal from me. He stole your relationship with me. He robbed you of 3 years of knowing how much your daughter loved and supported you. That conversation opened floodgates of communication that had been dammed up for years. My parents shared their own confusion and hurt about my apparent distance from the family. They talked about how they had defended Donald's failures and criticized my success because they genuinely believed that was the family dynamic, the troubled son who needed support, and the successful daughter who had moved beyond needing or wanting family connection. "We were so proud of your achievements," Dad told me during one of our long phone calls. "But Donald kept telling us that success had changed you, made you think you were better than us. We didn't want to lose you to your career, so we probably overcorrected by trying to keep you humble." The psychology made perfect sense in hindsight. Donald had exploited their fears about losing their successful daughter to create distance between us. He positioned himself as the son who would always need them, while painting me as the daughter who might outgrow them. Then he used that artificial distance to justify stealing money meant for their support. But perhaps the most healing part of our new relationship was my parents' complete rejection of the golden child dynamic that had defined our family for decades. They didn't just apologize for favoring Donald. They actively worked to undo the patterns that had enabled his manipulation. "We're done making excuses for him," Mom said firmly during one of our weekly calls. "Donald is an adult who made adult choices. He chose to steal from his sister and lie to his parents. Those choices have consequences, and we're not going to protect him from them anymore." True to Grandma Rose's ultimatum, Donald was facing real consequences. He had 30 days to provide a repayment plan for the $72,000, and he was required to attend gambling addiction counseling. Most importantly, he was banned from family gatherings until he had completed restitution and demonstrated genuine change. But the most satisfying consequence was also the most natural one. The truth about Donald's character spread through our extended family and social circles like water finding its level. I didn't have to campaign against him or actively destroy his reputation. The evidence spoke for itself, and people drew their own conclusions. Colleagues who had heard Donald's version of family dynamics, where he was the devoted son and I was the career-obsessed daughter, learned the real story through the family grapevine. Friends who had pitied him for having a selfish sister discovered that the selfish sister had actually been supporting the family, while the devoted son had been stealing from everyone. The social consequences were swift and severe. Donald's carefully crafted image as the charming, family-oriented good guy crumbled under the weight of documented evidence. People who had respected him for his devotion to his aging parents now saw him as a manipulative thief who had exploited his own family. But beyond the satisfaction of seeing justice served, I experienced something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Real, deep, sustainable peace that came from finally understanding my place in my family and my worth as a person. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like I had to prove my value to my family. I didn't have to work twice as hard, achieve twice as much, or give twice as generously to earn approval. I could just be Elizabeth, successful, generous when appropriate, and loved for exactly who I was. The financial impact was immediate and life-changing. $2,000 a month back in my budget meant $24,000 a year for my own goals and dreams. I opened a new investment account, increased my retirement contributions, and started planning for the house renovation I had been postponing while funding Donald's gambling addiction. But the emotional impact was even more significant. My parents' genuine appreciation for my support, their horror at how they had treated me, and their determination to rebuild our relationship on honest foundations, transformed me from the family scapegoat into the daughter they had always claimed to want, but had never allowed me to be. 6 months after Thanksgiving, Donald had managed to repay only $12,000 of the $72,000 he owed me, despite claiming he was working 2 jobs to make restitution. Private investigation revealed that he was actually still gambling, just more carefully, and using the pressure of family expectations as an excuse to borrow money from new victims. At that point, I made a decision that surprised even me. I stopped caring about the money. Not because $72,000 isn't significant, but because I realized that my real victory wasn't financial recovery. It was psychological freedom. I had broken the cycle of manipulation that had defined my entire adult relationship with my family. I had exposed the truth and established new boundaries based on honesty rather than exploitation. Donald could keep what remained of my money. It was tuition for the most valuable education I had ever received. The knowledge that toxic people will exploit any weakness, including family loyalty, and that protecting yourself from exploitation isn't selfish, it's essential. The most unexpected benefit of the whole experience was professional. The confidence and strategic thinking skills I had developed while investigating Donald's fraud translated directly into leadership opportunities at work. I was promoted to senior project manager 6 months after Thanksgiving, partly because I had demonstrated an ability to analyze complex situations, gather evidence, and present findings that changed organizational decision-making. My new boss mentioned during my performance review that I had developed executive presence and seemed more willing to challenge assumptions and advocate for my positions. She had no idea that I had learned those skills by taking down a family sociopath, but the psychological benefits were the same. I had proved to myself that I could handle complex, high-stakes situations with grace and effectiveness. Today, 2 years after that Thanksgiving revelation, my relationship with my parents is stronger than it has ever been. We talk regularly, visit frequently, and enjoy each other's company without the underlying tension that had poisoned our interactions for decades. They ask about my work because they're genuinely interested in my success, not because they're looking for evidence that I've become too materialistic. They respect my boundaries because they understand that boundaries protect relationships rather than limiting them. They appreciate my generosity when I choose to offer it, rather than expecting it as proof of my family loyalty. Most importantly, they see me clearly for who I actually am, a daughter who loves her family enough to confront difficult truths, who values honesty over harmony, and who has the strength to rebuild relationships on healthier foundations. Donald, meanwhile, has become a cautionary tale rather than a family member. He sends occasional emails promising to do better and asking for one more chance. But his words carry no weight because they're not backed by meaningful actions. He's still gambling, still lying, and still looking for new people to exploit. But he can't exploit our family anymore because the family has learned to verify rather than trust, to look at actions rather than words, and to protect the people who actually contribute rather than enabling the people who only consume. The lesson I learned from this experience goes far beyond family dynamics. Toxic people will always reveal themselves if you pay attention to patterns rather than promises. They will exploit any weakness, including love and loyalty. And the only way to deal with the toxic people is to remove their power to harm you, even if that means accepting the loss of relationships you thought you wanted to preserve. My parents learned a different but equally important lesson. Good intentions aren't enough if they enable destructive behavior. Loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from the consequences of their choices. And family loyalty means supporting the family members who actually contribute to the family's welfare, not the ones who exploit it. As for Donald, I hope he eventually learns that stealing from people who love you doesn't just cost money, it costs everything. Trust, respect, relationships, reputation, and ultimately, the very family support he thought he was clever enough to manipulate forever. But whether he learns that lesson or not is no longer my concern. I've learned my own lesson. I'm worth more than I was ever allowed to believe. I deserve better than I was ever trained to expect. And I have the power to create the family dynamics I want, rather than accepting the ones I was born into. And that knowledge is worth far more than $72,000.